So is that a joint?
It's marijuana
it's
inside
weed.
of tobacco.
Oh, okay. So it's like pot tobacco
Yeah.
posh.
You never had that?
Yeah, I think I tried one once.
Come on, man. You probably can't because of stockholders, right?
I mean, it's legal, right?
It's totally legal.
Okay.
Come on, man.
Okay.
Come on, man.
You're listening to Drug Nonsense, the podcast exposing the falsehoods and sheer idiocy of the mainstream media's reporting about drugs. This is episode 2 of our special Patreon subscriber podcast, Drug Nonsense, where we critique the mainstream media reporting about drugs.
We've decided to make this episode free to entice you to become a subscriber.
That's right. This podcast is different from our normal podcast, Drug Positive. This podcast is only available on patreon.com for our subscribers.
Except this episode.
Right. So if you like what you hear, head over to patreon.com and search for Drug Positive and become a subscriber. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Drug Nonsense. I'm Emmanuel Spherios.
I'm Tatiana McCoffkin.
And the biggest nonsense this week in the media about drugs is Elon Musk ostensibly smoking pot during his podcast interview with Joe Rogan. The media's actually gone crazy with this. 2 of his executives have resigned. And here's an article in front of us right now from CNBC, and there's a whole bunch of them saying that the Air Force is actually looking into Elon Musk's pot smoking because marijuana is prohibited for someone with a government security clearance. But what makes this whole thing nonsense is the fact that he didn't smoke pot, everyone. Go and watch the Joe Rogan podcast on YouTube and watch. He does not inhale. He puffs a little bit and blows it out like a cigar.
Yeah, he tries to act very jaded about the whole thing.
I think he was trying to impress Joe Rogan. I mean, he actually says, I'm not a big pot smoker, right? And then he just kind of like sucks on it and immediately blows it out. And the media is going crazy about how Elon Musk is smoking pot.
Seemed like he was sort of treating it like a cigar and not inhaling it the way that a pot smoker would.
No, it's obvious when you see it, right? No, he just tasted the smoke, right? You're not going to get high. You're not going to feel any tobacco or cannabis effect from like just filling your mouth with smoke and then exhaling it. He did not smoke cannabis during that show, but the entire media, every media outlet is claiming that he did. And the other thing is like, so what if he did, right? This is clearly a case of drug nonsense.
Yes, it's theatrics.
Right. Was there any intention in this event by either Joe Rogan or Elon Musk than just spontaneous whatever? I mean,
the appearance was just this sort of bro fest or whatever. Like Elon Musk was trying to feel cool and show off a little bit and fit in with this like hyper masculine, Joe Rogan.
Yeah. And Rogan's a libertarian, so Rogan's always pushing the envelope a bit on stuff, and he believes in ending the drug war. But why would Elon Musk do that? A lot of people are saying he had some reason to do it, right? They think he's like super genius.
Well, people say that about Trump too. They love to think that about powerful people, that there's some kind of plan behind it all. They're playing chess and all this stuff. It just seemed impulsive when you look at it.
I think it's just ego, right? I think narcissists are always impulsive. It's one of their faults, and Musk just loves media attention. And of course, he's liberal. He wants to appeal to his liberal fans, and I feel bad for him, It just looked pathetic.
Yeah, and if you're in the middle of an interview, why would you smoke pot unless it was a certain kind of interview, like where you were going to...
But again, he didn't smoke pot.
Right.
Let me read a little bit from this CNBC article. Air Force is looking into Elon Musk's pot smoking. The U.S. Air Force has been looking into Elon Musk apparently smoking weed on a podcast. Musk's SpaceX provides services for the Air Force with multiple high-value contracts. And everyone, just don't forget that Elon Musk makes his money launching military and spy satellites for the U.S. government.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. People you shouldn't forget that. Okay. Marijuana use is prohibited for someone with a government security clearance, and it's the central issue in the Air Force inquiry. SpaceX did not immediately respond to CNBC's request for comment. How do you think this whole thing's going to fall out?
I have a feeling the whole thing's just going to fade away.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, there's no substance to it. It's a big nothing burger. Well, maybe Elon Musk will speak out against the drug war. That would be nice. That would be a good direction for this story to take. We'll see.
Yeah, I guess I should thank him for at least pretending to smoke cannabis on the show, because that certainly helps normalize cannabis use in society.
Yep. Okay, let's move on to that article about the young man in Iowa that called an ambulance. What happened?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so this is from northwestiowa.com. Ambulance call leads to arrest for drugs. This is just a horrible situation that happens all the time. In this case, it was in Paulina, Iowa, and a young person, 21-year-old David Wester, took LSD and MDMA, and I guess he started freaking out and called an ambulance. And they came, and then the police came, and they searched the home, and they found drugs, and they ended up arresting him, and now he's going to court. There should be amnesty for anyone to call 911. Stories like this mean that when your friend is overdosing, you're going to be afraid to call 911 because you don't want to get arrested.
There are many deaths that have happened because people are afraid of this exact scenario playing out.
Amnesty for calling an ambulance, amnesty for taking someone to the hospital. Absolute. In fact, we interview a mother whose son died after his friends were too afraid to call 911 after he took 7 ecstasy tablets and he was seizing, and it was an hour later before he already had rigor mortis by the time the ambulance arrived because they were too scared to call.
Wow.
Yeah, so every one of these episodes, we want to give you a recommendation of something you can do to help end the drug war, to help improve drug policies. And so if you're listening to this right now, I'd like you to call or email the O'Brien County Sheriff's Office in Iowa and tell them that they need to implement amnesty policies. This is a case of David Wester, September 6th, 2018. They should drop the charges against him. People should feel free to call an ambulance whenever they feel that they're overdosing on drugs or have a medical emergency. The phone number for the O'Brien County Sheriff's Office is 712-757-3451. Or you can email them at sheriff, SHERIFF, at o'briencountysheriff.com. Okay, here's another article. Court rejects murder conviction for dealer in overdose death. And that's a good thing. The specifics of this case, in 2014, Skylar O'Kelly gave what he thought was LSD to his friend, which actually ended up being 25B N-bomb, and his friend died. And then he got convicted of both drug trafficking as well as second-degree murder. And that was in 2014, and he appealed his case, and now Mississippi State Appeals Court just overruled the murder conviction.
Wow, that's good. This is such a sad situation.
Yeah, right. And so some of the nonsense in this article, number one, is that all throughout this article, they say that he was dealing synthetic LSD. Mm-hmm. I actually had to go back to a 2015 article to find out that it really wasn't LSD at all. It was 25B N-bomb. And so once again, we have a prohibition death being blamed on the drug users themselves.
Yeah, he intended to give his friend LSD, and that's what he thought he was giving his friend. But it was a different chemical, and they should name what that chemical is in their articles.
Yeah, not only should they name what chemical it is, but they should explain that the cause of this person's death was prohibition and the resulting misidentification of drugs. The fact that LSD is illegal means that people can easily sell fake LSD, and young people can buy misrepresented drugs that are far more dangerous, like the N-bombs.
Yeah, so they don't explain how it happened that this poisoned drug came into the kid's hands, what the dangers are, how he could have protected himself against it, how he could have tested it.
Zero analysis that this is a drug war death. One person died, and now they're trying to ruin the life of another person when the fact is the problem is our fault. It's our drug policies. The judges, the prosecutors, the police, all of us collectively as a society are responsible for this death. And to absolve ourselves from the blame, we want to punish another person whose friend died. You don't think he feels enough guilt already? Now we want to ruin his life even more. To absolve ourselves of guilt, to avoid implementing drug policies that actually save lives. Tragic.
And do you want to say anything about the legislative stuff?
Yeah. In Mississippi a year ago, they tried to pass a bill that would give a minimum 40-year prison sentence for anyone who deals a drug that results in a death. So if you give your friend a drug and they happen to die, minimum of 40-year prison sentence. It failed, thankfully. But state officials are now turning over some drug dealer prosecutions to the feds because there is a federal law that requires a 20-year minimum prison sentence for anyone who dies if you've dealt them a drug. And that means even if you've given them the drug, because the law makes no distinction between selling or giving a drug to someone. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, mandatory minimums have been a tool that's been used in the drug war, and it's just wreaked havoc on communities and on families and people's lives.
Absolutely. Tying judges' hands where they aren't even legally allowed to make decisions to give leniency. We need to end mandatory minimums immediately.
Well, there's also some good news this week in the media. There are some activists in Portland, Maine, who staged a die-in against drug war.
That's right. We are reading an article here from the Press Herald in Portland, Maine, where 57 drug policy reform activists staged a die-in at the Portland City Hall, that's Portland, Maine, to draw attention to the 57 overdose or drug poisoning deaths that happened in the city last year. It's a great photo here. They're all lying on the steps of City Hall, and they have signs like, "I was somebody's baby," "I'm your mother," "I wanted help," "Killed by the war on drugs." This is what we need to do, people. We need to get out there. We need to get involved. We need to protest. We need to demand changes in drug laws. We need to demand decriminalization and a harm reduction approach.
And they are calling for a safe injection site in Portland, Maine.
That's right. The main demand is that the city support what they're calling overdose prevention sites, which is another name for safe injection sites, places where people who inject drugs can go and do so where there's staff present with naloxone. It has been demonstrated again and again that nobody ever dies in a safe injection facility.
Yeah, it actually seems like smart messaging and branding considering the crisis that's going on and the way people are understanding the situation in this country. The idea of an overdose prevention site sounds like a no-brainer. Of course you want to support that, right?
Yeah, right. I think it's a good language, overdose prevention sites. It's good wording. So here's another one. This is from Australia. A 20-year-old man who was busted at the Lost Paradise Music Festival with 4 tabs of LSD, 1/3 of a gram of cocaine, 4.5 grams of ketamine, and 17 tablets of MDA. Had his charges dismissed by the judge. He got lucky because he gave a whole bunch of supposedly impeccable references and spoke about his good prospects for rehabilitation.
Huh.
So this is, to me, like the Spanish Inquisition, right?
Yeah.
They're telling you that something's wrong with you. You don't believe in the message of the church, or you must be sick for using these drugs. And if you deny that, if you say, hey, I'm fine, I like using drugs and they enhance my life, they're going to come down on you like crazy.
If you claim to not be a witch, they're going to throw you in the water to see if you drown.
They want you to get on your knees and beg for forgiveness and admit that you're wrong. I'm an addict, I'm sick, and I really know how to turn my life around, and I'm never going to do it again. I have good prospects for rehabilitation. And so you appease the ideology of the judge, and they give you leniency. That phenomena helps solidify anti-drug mentalities that perpetuate the drug war. Because when drug users have to pretend to be sick in order to avoid potentially spending 10 years in prison,
authority figures want you to recognize their authority and grovel before them.
and buy into the ideology. Well, here is one other thing interesting about this article, right? He claimed to the judge that he had planned to take the drugs he had over the 4 days during the festival. And I can believe that with 4 tabs of LSD and clearly a third of a gram of cocaine. People can do that in a few hours. But 17 tablets of MDA, I don't think he was actually planning to do all that by himself.
Yeah, he was going to share with his friends.
That's right. But the judge either didn't know that or just let it go because he played the game well enough. What will you do, dear listener, if you get arrested? Will you play the game? Will you bow down to the Spanish Inquisition to avoid a long prison sentence? Or will you stand up for what you know is right? Something to think about.
Okay, so you have something there about the war in Afghanistan and the poppy fields.
Right, yeah, this is from the Cato Institute. They're a libertarian think tank, and they've been against the war on drugs for a long time. And I'll just read this whole thing. This is a really short article called More Futility in the War on Drugs from cato.org, cato.org. Despite $8.6 billion spent on the eradication of opium in Afghanistan over the past 17 years, the U.S. military has failed to stem the flow of Taliban revenue from the illicit drug trade. Afghanistan produces the majority of the world's opium, and recent U.S. military escalations have failed to alter the situation. According to a recent piece in the Wall Street Journal, quote, 9 months of targeted airstrikes on opium production sites across Afghanistan have failed to put a significant dent in the illegal drug trade that provides the Taliban with hundreds of millions of dollars. This foreign war on drugs has been no more successful than its domestic counterpart. If U.S. military might cannot suppress the underground market, local police forces have no hope. Supply-side repression does not seem to work, and its cost and unintended consequences are large. So that's the entire article there.
There's a lot of nonsense under the surface in this one.
I agree, with their general sentiment. Let's end the war on drugs. It's not working. But come on, does anyone really believe that the U.S. military is trying to end opium production in Afghanistan? If you can level Aleppo in Syria to the ground and destroy every inch of an entire city, you can bomb and destroy all the poppy fields.
Easily.
Yeah, Do you think people really hear this and think, oh, they're conspiracy theorists? Do people really still think that the fact that the U.S. intelligence and U.S. military is participating in the drug trade is just conspiracy theory? Do you think
I think that people think that if they don't think about it very much.
I mean, we had that National Geographic 6-part TV series, Nat Geo, where they talk all about U.S. government involvement in the drug trade.
Right.
Everyone realizes it now.
And of course, there are vets coming home from Afghanistan with personal experience of the situation.
Yeah, our cousin, he got back from Afghanistan. He had some PTSD, so we were discussing that. And I said to him, well, what did you do over there? And he looks over at his father. His father says, go ahead, you can tell him the truth. And he says, we were protecting the poppy fields in Afghanistan. This is happening, everyone. Why isn't the Cato Institute pointing that out? Why are they still framing it as our failure despite all of our best efforts? Drugs are a geopolitical weapon. People need to understand that. There are billions of dollars made in the illegal drug trade, and that money flows somewhere.
Right.
And the U.S. military wants to make sure that that drug money flows into Western corporate coffers. HSBC, largest bank in Europe, got busted for laundering drug money from cartels. They actually built drop boxes in the walls of the side of their building because the night deposit boxes weren't big enough to handle the huge garbage bags full of cash that the cartels were depositing. So they constructed larger ones so the cartels could fit all of their drug money into their night deposit boxes. They got a slap on the wrist. A few $1 million in fines. This happens not just through HSBC, but tons of corporate. You can Google it. You can find all the corporations who get busted for laundering drug money. And if it wasn't coming into Western corporations, China or Russia or Iran would be doing it. And then they would be making the money from drugs. The geopolitical war between countries is one of the main reasons why we can't legally regulate drugs. There's just too much money being made. If we legalize drugs internationally, they would be taxed by local governments, but their price would drop and there wouldn't be the immense profits that end up corrupting politicians and the military and intelligence agents. This is the elephant in the living room. It's not talked about enough.
Calling them a geopolitical weapon is spot on because the same behavior goes on with weapons themselves. Wars are perpetuated and instigated and weapons sold to both sides. And in the same way, the drug market is manipulated and controlled and used for profit.
It's all about the money. Follow the money, you find out who's behind it.
Okay, we have to talk about this author in Los Angeles who is telling Los Angelinos not to use cocaine.
Right. This is kind of classic, right? Here's an article from the LA Times, and the title is simply, it's an op-ed, and the title is simply, Los Angeles, Stop Doing Cocaine. Let me just read this to you. In Los Angeles, conscious consumerism is in vogue. We vote with our dollars, leveraging purchasing power to effect change in a world that often defends the profitable status quo. Evidence of our ethical consumption is everywhere, in local markets stocked with fair trade coffee and vegan items, on the radio in advertisements for conflict-free diamonds, on the road where energy-efficient hybrids have become the norm. Yet, if we truly care about our world, why do so many of us still view recreational cocaine use as permissible?
This seems so outdated. I mean, it's on a parallel with greenwashing, recycle, change your light bulbs, all these ideas about consumerism and changing the world through your personal choices when the system overall is what needs to be. I would think modern activists and people living in this day and age would know that we need to change the system. We need to look deeper.
Right. So this is exactly like the people who criticize MDMA users because saffron was being unsustainably harvested, chopping down saffron forests to get the roots of the saffron tree. If there wasn't prohibition, there wouldn't be the environmental destruction going on. So essentially, they're saying that all of the negative consequences of prohibition, cartels, and violence, etc., are actually the fault of people who are using the drugs.
Right.
It's total nonsense.
Yeah, as if all of these negative effects are natural consequence of cocaine.
That's right.
Itself.
That's
it just existed.
If cocaine were legal, regulated, if coca tea was available, if the coca farmers were able to sell their product to legitimate companies producing mild coca products, we wouldn't have the problems that we have today with cocaine. If cocaine were regulated, there would be no cartels murdering people across Mexico and the rest of the world. You can't blame cocaine users for this.
Yeah, and why are they picking on cocaine anyway? I mean, the same could have been said of cannabis not too long ago.
Yeah, well, maybe the next sentence in the article will give you an indication. It is, the cokehead has become a ubiquitous figure in our city's imagination. A culture of privilege has fostered an image of cocaine as an elegant accessory to fame, fortune, and status. We associate it with extravagant celebrity-filled parties. Cocaine gives an ephemeral high, affording the user a brief reprieve from real life. But there's no denying the ugly reality of the cocaine trade. Its blood cost is not a hypothetical, it is blatant. Violence touches every link on the supply chain from South America to your nostrils, at which point, let's not forget, cocaine remains lethal. Listen to the next sentence. But the fact that reactionaries have used cocaine to attack communities of color doesn't somehow make cocaine okay. Prohibition has been used to attack communities of colors, and you are buying right into it by blaming cocaine users.
It really boggles me how this author can be so mixed up.
So he does put a caveat in here. He says, I don't mean to suggest that I support the war on drugs. It's been an outright failure. I'm not interested in lecturing those ensnared by cocaine addiction. I am interested in making social use of the drug seem abhorrent, as antisocial as it really is.
It's just the same old just say no. And he cannot see it about himself.
Yeah, the casual, non-problematic use of cocaine is normal, Dan Johnson. It is not abhorrent. It is not antisocial. In fact, cocaine casual use makes people more social. You're the one looking down on people. You don't want to support the drug war, but you are.
This person feels so superior. It's just oozing out of the article.
Yeah, and I'll give a caveat, too. Cocaine can be a problematic drug. Everyone knows that. But those problems are greatly exacerbated by prohibition. Okay, so here's another one. This one is about spice, or K2. And there's probably a lot of articles like this out there. This is on CNN.com. And they write here, K2 is believed to be behind more than 100 overdoses in New Haven, Connecticut this week. Earlier this year, K2 was tied to 60 cases of severe bleeding, 4 deaths across Chicago and central Illinois. In a separate incident, 33 people collapsed in the streets of New York, etc., etc. And so, this article is warning people about synthetic cannabinoids and talking about how the DEA is trying to crack down on it and the World Health Organization, all that. But the nonsense in here is that nowhere does it point out that the only reason people are ingesting this stuff is because in their states, cannabis is still illegal, or because these drugs produce somewhat of a cannabis-like high, but don't show up on drug tests. In other words, these are prohibition-related deaths again, and they won't bring that up. They won't use these fatalities to call for cannabis legalization. Instead, they just buy right into the whole same drug war party line. Drugs are dangerous. You shouldn't use these things. Period. That's it.
So that's it for this week.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next week.
And if you happen to be a non-subscriber hearing this on our Drug Positive feed, make sure to go to patreon.com and subscribe.